So my name is Boon Han. Thank you for inviting me, for everybody else from Karn, and just hosting this, putting all of this together. We're usually not welcome to talk about adoption, and certainly not, asked to come and talk about adoption. So I was thinking today, a lot of people do know about South Korea and the intercountry adoption program. So I wanted to look at the aspects of domestic adoption because there is an idea that South Koreans don't adopt. That is simply not true. And then I'm a social worker. So I wanted to look into what happens with the children who, are adopted. And then there's a disruption or dissolution. But what I found, I think, is something like that has been a reoccurring experience the past couple of months. When you have one question and it's answered, then you end up with 10 more questions. So I need to work more on this clearly, but I hope at least it will be a little bit informative for everybody today. Okay, so this is what it is about. And it's not just that dissolution of adoption is an option. It is, I think, in most countries where you have adoption. But what you see is that the adoptive parents have the right to do so based on the child's behavior. And it literally says that in the studies that has been done on dissolution. So one problem, obviously, in going into details is that adoption documents are private. So they're only opened for the, special ones. But there are a couple of studies, so I'll try to go through that. So just what I hope to be able to do, go through the background, both my reason for choosing this today and also give a bit of a general overview of Korean adoption. So the Article 17, I think, is just one way into the Korean, the special adoption law. And then I think we need to go back a little bit to understand what is happening today and why it is as complex as it is. There are some other key changes that I hope could help also explain some of the things. And then we do need to talk about human rights, and Korea has signed, ratified the UNCRC. So it's not going to be a statistical exercise, but these are the numbers of domestic adoptions and of dissolution. And so dissolution can happen by agreement, where simply you agree, we are now not related, so I will remove you from my family registry. The more interesting one is court order, which is not court order as the social worker or the police have asked the adoption to be dissolved, but that can as well be the parents who ask for a court order to be not related to the child, really. And I think, again, that is a huge problem, that parents do have this right. The adoption numbers does not really reflect the condition of child welfare. Rather, these are, we have from history, we know that there were quotas to intercountry and domestic adoptions. So we don't see fewer number of children in facilities. That's not what it's reflecting, but it's more that the critique of adoption, both in intercountry adoption and domestic adoption, is somewhat an issue. And so the numbers are just artificially regulated. However, for the past couple of years, actually the placement for domestic adoptions have been higher than intercountry adoptions. Again, this is often infants. It's healthy infants. It's mostly girls now. I think at my generation, boys were more popular. So it's very much a market where parents get to choose. They do talk about, we need to preserve the adoption system to protect and to help and to find long-term placements for children with disabilities and older children. I think most people would agree with that. However, when we look at the intake by the adoption agencies, which are privately run and intake is still in private hands, then they do not take children that have disabilities. They don't even take children that come from moms who may have been smoking during pregnancy, or if the child has been hospitalized a day or two after birth. So it's very healthy children that go into the adoption system. So the special adoption law from 2012, among adoptees, overseas adoptees, is something that I think they are very proud of. First of all, because with number 9, then suddenly our rights to access records have been guaranteed. This is not an absolute access. There is still some limitations to that. But adoptees participated in Korea in revising the law. That took several years, but I think it was very meaningful for stakeholders suddenly to be able to influence the legislation that really regulates our rights and our access to documents. I think what we have not discussed so much is that it was also a victory for domestic adoptive parents, because they now have been given the right to register the children, the adoptees, as biological children, really. Before, there were 2 categories where you have the adopted child, a yangja. Obviously, if a child can be born to the parents, it could be an adoptee, but then from 2005, through the civil law, adopted parents are able to register the adopted child as a real adopted child. That is literally translated. It sounds very strange. I can hear that. This is important because with the yangja to the left, the category, the child maintained a bond with the original family. So the child belonged to 2 families, really. And that meant all the rights to the child went to the new adoptive family, or the parental rights went to the new adoptive family, but other rights would stay with the original family. So there would always be discussion at best, struggles at worst, between the families of where and how and when. So adoptive families have been, obviously lobbying to be able to register the child as a, 친양자, as a real adopted child with full rights. What happened before we got this category of the 친양자 was for the good adoptive parents who wanted to grant their adopted children full rights. They actually put them on the family registry as a natural born child. It was the only way to guarantee that on one hand, there would be full rights, but also to hide the fact that it was an adoptee and not a natural born child. I have left out, there should be one more row about inheritance, but if I had to explain that, I think that, okay, you laugh, so you know what I'm trying to say that I don't want to get into, but that's a huge issue too. What adoptees and overseas adoptees, we're always so visible in our new countries. Obviously, domestic adoptees are not, and really up until 2005, the adoptees just don't figure in the statistics because they go as real-born children. And with the work that we've done, then we run into some of the domestic adoptees, and they discover this, when the neighbor is too drunk and spill the secret or something like that. So I think as difficult as overseas adoptees having access in our records, for domestic adoptees, who are registered as real children, there are no records. So yeah, that's just to say, with the civil law from 2005, We have that real adopted child category that gives the same right to the adoptee, but you're not just an adoptee, you're the real adoptee. So to address this narrative that we need intercountry adoption from Korea because Koreans don't want to adopt is simply not true. There is a very interesting book on Korean domestic adoptee and inheritance that goes back and look at what was happening in Joseon Dynasty, which is 600, 700, 800 years ago. So there is one story the book's open with that talks about an older Korean man, and he obviously needs a son. And the preference for son, it grows as the inheritance is switched from being equal between boys and girls to being much more male preference. At the beginning of Joseon Dynasty in 1390s, there is really almost 50-50% division between girls and boys. But as the society moved towards a preference for sons, so does the adoption also. You see many more adoption, both among royalties and among commoners. So Yi Kam-young, he finds out, he actually has children, doesn't have the son that he wants. And because in Korea, you can't, at that time, this is very recent, the law legislating on names have been changed, but otherwise you could not change your family name. So that's why to find an heir to the family, you would have to go through the male line and find a cousin somewhere because that would have the right name. So I'm thinking when Koreans talk about the bloodline is important, even though they're sending quite a lot of children out of the country, this is what is being referred to, that the law did not allow for the family name to be changed. So for practical reasons, you can't take in a son that is not family. So what he did is he finds someone that he thinks is suitable. They run a trial period. He finds out that the son is really not good enough, and then returns him and goes out and find another distant cousin, which he thinks is much better. And they literally, the author described it as they served each other's needs very well. And that is, I think, illustrates the historical foundation of adoption and how adoption is thought about and how it has been used. So it was about really continuing the family lineage. It was about finding a son and finding a son that is appropriate for your family. It was never about the child. It was never about the child needing anything. So we can jump up to today. And there are really not many studies on adoption dissolution. I think that obviously in itself is an issue. But there are a couple of scholars who have been able to interview adoptive parents. So 19 here, and the next one have interviewed 17 parents. And the interesting, so several things are interesting there, but one of the things that kind of got to me was it seems that in the increasing rate of adoption dissolution is being used as an argument for intercountry adoption. As if because it doesn't quite work for us in Korea, we need to send more children out of the country. And that is a bit characteristic of how the discourse is within Korea, that it becomes very for and against. And so when professionals, want to discuss something as child welfare, not a lot of people are actually listening, because the conclusion has already been drawn that we want to send more children. We want a system that makes it easier, smoother to facilitate the adoptions. And so I just summarized some of the reasons that Park Mi-hyun here found that the parents self-reported. And I think the big headline there would be simply, it's stressful. It's stressful for the family to suddenly have another person in the family. And then they obviously talk about attachment and all other problems, but to think that there is no support, to think that there are no interest in solving these issues, because they don't really seem very different from other families. I mean, child rearing can be hard, I think, for anyone at any time. And your in-laws, your own family might not always support you. So looking at these reasons, I think it's very disturbing that would end in an adoption dissolution, that based on this, that an adult can go and say, I'm not really satisfied with this child. I will return the child. And that's kind of the same that we see in the other one. At this point, she says that there are only around 10 adoption dissolutions a year out of 3,000 adoptions. But also then in the next sentence, highlight that for most of the both adoptions and adoption dissolutions, they won't figure in the statistics. So it is quite difficult to get, I think, to get a proper overview of what is happening, because the information, is kept by the adoption agencies who are facilitating the adoptions. One thing that recurring theme in the interviews here were on the motivation and the interest in adopting. A lot of the parents said, I think I can do better. I think I will be a good parent. And it was listed in most of the cases here that the child was from an unwed mother. So it's also clear that there is an idea that me, as they were all married, a little bit older and also had resources, would be a better parent for those reasons than this unwed mother who, very irresponsible, had gotten out and gotten pregnant. And so I think starting with that, obviously they end up being surprised what it really means to have a child and be responsible for the child and take care of that. For one of the interviews, the interviewee said that the start of the dissolution began when the child went to kindergarten and said, my parents are not really my real parents. And yet, I'm not sure how to comment on that, but for a child who goes to kindergarten and not be allowed to say that, and then having that starting a path towards dissolution, I think is enormously problematic. They both write about, the need for services, post-adoption services and parental education. So the first official study on parent education was done about 5 years ago. So really everything related to adoption has been done by the adoption agencies. And only after 12, where part of it moved to the family court. So it's the same with education that that only recently has that also. There have been attempts to finance projects that are done outside adoption agencies. So there are a couple of studies where social workers have been interviewed. These social workers, have been referred to the researcher through the adoption agencies. But I think something that goes again in Korean research and in policy making and in lobbying is the state should fix it. So I don't know if you really have to do research to draw that conclusion. They do, however, say in the interviews that the secrecy is an issue. The secrecy that they can't provide proper education because the adoptive parents kind of don't want to acknowledge that they are adoptive parents. Also, they can hardly educate them because they don't want to get together. They don't want to do seminars. They don't want to come out. So the education was almost limited to interviews now and then, meeting one-on-one and talking a little bit. So I will agree that there is a huge need for parental education, certainly, and post-adoption services. But I think it's also concerning that they, as the adoption agencies, they continue the practice of adoption, but they seem to be much less interested in providing education that could actually have a positive influence of their both the disruption and dissolutions. So there were a lot of interesting quotes from this study, the next one. I just chosen one of them to say that, and it's not just to blame the social workers saying that they think adoption dissolution is great, because they also had concerns about, education, and they did not agree that just because you have a disability, then dissolution is okay. But I think looking at the survey and thinking that this is what we are discussing, that says quite a lot about where we are in the process and how little has been done. We know that Korea has at least, 70 years of experience with intercountry adoption. So this is not a new field. There should be there could have been, the resources could have been used, maybe more useful during the past decades. So only in this one are there any follow-ups on what happens to the children. Interestingly, she does not give the numbers, but she gives percentage. In the other studies, they said that most of the children simply just ends up in institutions. Because again, it's adoption is commonly done on the parents' terms, and the parents typically don't want an older child. They certainly don't want a child that may have been damaged or may have been through other traumatic events. Yes. So I'm not going to go through all of this, but we actually do have pending legislation now. It is at the very last judicial committee. So in Korea, when laws are made, obviously it's a lawmaker who spearheads that, but often it's the NGOs who goes in and, spearhead it and say, this is what we need, this is how we want to change it. And so that's some of the things we've been doing the past couple of years in relation to dissolution and to family registration. The Korea has had a system up until 2005, until it was found unconstitutional, where only the man can be head of the family. So that has created quite significant problems for women because they were not able to be the head of the family. And with that also then the change of the family name were restricted. With that had implications not only for adopted children, but also then children from brought together by new marriages or with divorce, that they would not be able to change their family name to the mother's new husband. And then the children who can see that the father and the child does not have the same name would know that this is, a different family. Something is wrong. That is possible now. I shouldn't judge if that is unconditionally good or bad, because changing the name also means you can actually cover up the history of the different family members. This is going very, I will run through just at the end the human rights. Korea has ratified the UNCRC, has signed the Hague Convention, but not ratified it. But I think we don't even need that to draw a conclusion on adoption dissolution, or hopefully what direction it should go in. So I'm thinking that most of you are familiar with this already, but we have these 4 principles, and there is no excuse for Korea not to follow that, not abide by that. Korea has had reservations to 3 articles. I saw in the database this morning, it has not been updated, but Korea do not have reservations. They have before actually had a reservation to Article 21 on adoption. But I think for adoptees, then it's not only Article 21 that's important, but it is as well, Article 7 and 8 that really guarantees the right to origin. And even in the case where we have lost our origin, the state obligates itself to go in and amend that. So to think that we still have a system where children can be removed from families, can end up in institutions at the will of parents, to me seems that it does not really follow what Korea otherwise have signed on to. So to finish off, this is one quote. I've broken it up, but if I read it out, so this is the special rapporteur, right, on the sale of children and child prostitution and child pornography, who says that one of the key principles that must govern the adoption process, both at the domestic and intercountry level, is the best interest of the child. And I think we can easily end in a debate, what does that mean, the best interest of a child? Does that mean the child can just, get candy for breakfast and watch TV all night? No, it does not. So there. And then Du Bois continues, this principle is breached when the purpose of adoption is to find a child for adoptive parents rather than a family for the child. But not only that, international human rights norms do not set a right to adopt a child or the right to be adopted. Right? So again, it's not because the child says, it's not because the parents want. It's because there is an objective standard. There's a professional standard that has gone in and evaluated what is the best in this situation. Yes, and conclude with that this is, a very, I would say, detailed. It's actually not difficult to follow. I think the guidelines here, there are also other determinants of how to measure the best interest of the child. So Korea is due to submit the next country report, I think, next year. And I hope that the different groups and also the adult adoptees would be able to contribute to this, not only looking at intercountry adoption, but adoption in general, because I jumped over this very quickly. I can go back. So the reason why there are the fully revised, and it says the special adoption law, and intercountry adoptions, because Korea is going to split up the special adoption law. So there will be one law specifically regulating domestic adoption and one law regulating adoption going out of Korea, but also going into Korea. And so stakeholders have quite a big say in Korea. Adoptees, funny enough, can get away with saying quite a lot of things and influence the process. And I hope that, we will be able to do that both with domestic law that influences us, but also reporting to international bodies. Yes, I will finish with that.